Welcome to CVs for Academic and Industry Jobs. My name is Kay Gruder. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm Assistant Director of Graduate Student and Postdoc Career Programs and Services at UConn's Center for Career Development. Before we get started, I'd like to just go over a few items so you know how to participate in the webinar. You should see your attendee interface up in the left corner of your screen, and you'll have the opportunity to submit questions by typing your questions into the chat pane of the control panel. You can send your questions really at any time during the presentation, and since this is previously recorded, the questions will be emailed to me and I'll answer them within 3 to 5 business days. Also note that you'll get a recording of today's webinar that will be emailed to you within 24 hours. And there's also a short evaluation that will appear at the end of the webinar for you to complete. Let's look at our agenda for this session. So today's topics, we're going to cover the similarities and differences of CVs and resumes. We're going to look at common sections included in CVs and discuss content and format. We're also going to talk about adding bullet point statements to various sections of your CV. And we will think strategically about overall content and format. So what is a CV? As we begin, I'd like to take a minute to share about some of the differences and some of the similarities between a CV and a resume. Many times these words are used interchangeably, but within the US context, they really are two different documents, though they do share some of the same content. A CV is a very complete and expansive document, usually including everything you've done and accomplished throughout your academic career. Common sections on a CV include research, teaching, publications, presentations, awards, and work experience, with many other sections being added as well. The CV is a multi-page document, and it's essentially as many pages as it needs to be including all the various areas of content. A resume, on the other hand, includes content from your background that is most recent and relevant, usually to a specific job posting or opportunity. The resume is most often 1 to 2 pages in length. And I like this image of the blender. It's a good visual because everything that could go into the blender could be included in a CV. But for a resume, you would be picking and choosing items and creating a more concentrated document. If you're also interested in learning about resumes, the Center for Career Development also has resume workshops and webinars. Keep in mind that when you're applying for a job or opportunity, you will need to provide the document the employer requests. So if they request a resume, you'll want to send a resume. If they request a CV, you'll want to send a CV. And if they say send a CV or a resume, it's really your decision. And you'll want to think about which document is going to be the strongest for that position. No matter which document is submitted to an employer, the goals are typically similar. For the individual, let's look at some of those goals. Basically, you hope to get your CV or resume read. You hope to strategically feature your qualifications, your skills, your strengths, your experience and knowledge. You'd like to show your fit with the position or opportunity. And ultimately, you hope to obtain an invitation to interview. For the organization, the goals are usually to compare you to other applicants, to understand your fit, to narrow the pool or number of applicants, and then ultimately consider you for an interview. Before we talk about the major content sections on a CV, it's really important to recognize that your CV will most likely be read by an applicant tracking system. This is usually referred to as ATS, and these are systems that scan your documents for keywords, and they're looking for keywords in relationship to the information that is in usually a job posting, could be an internship posting. I've included some links here on this slide to provide you with information about how to format your documents and how to use keywords. Basically, you're trying to optimize your CV as it's being read by the applicant tracking system. It's really important to learn how applicant tracking systems work. It's important that you keep your format simple and follow recommendations for optimizing. Keywords are very, very important and must match. And it's really important to tailor action verbs for each job. Most job postings are written with the use of keywords and action verbs. So if a job posting says must be able to collaborate, then you'd want to be sure that you have the word collaborate in your document if in fact you have collaborated. Now let's move on to some of the more common content sections in a CV. We won't get to all of them, but we'll focus on some of the major sections. The first section is your contact information, and there are a couple of examples on this slide. Your name and contact information appear at the top of your CV, and this section does not include a section heading. You just want to start with your name. And you can decide how many lines you're going to dedicate to your contact information. Typically, your name resides on its own line, and then the rest of your contact information can be on as few lines as you would like. So let's look at this section where it says first and last, and then University of Connecticut. This is an example that would be common for a graduate student or a postdoc who was applying for an academic position. It's pretty common when applying for an academic position to have the name of the university, the department in which you're getting your degree, and then your contact information in terms of a phone number and an email. If you have more than one phone number or more than one email, it's usually best just to list one phone number and one email, making it really easy for the potential employer to reach out to you. You might also include a LinkedIn URL, or if you're part of a research community like ResearchGate, you could put a customized URL for your profile within ResearchGate. If you're using your CV for an industry position, you would not use your department's address, but you might use your residential address or a portion of that address, like the city and state in which you live. It's also becoming very common to just list your name, your email, and your phone number. This is often an indicator to a potential employer that you're open to opportunities in a range of geographic locations. Now, on the top portion of this slide, where it just says Jonathan Husky, and it has a phone number and an email and a LinkedIn, you can also be making some strategic decisions in that if you want to let a Connecticut employer know that you live in Connecticut, and let's say you live in Vernon, Connecticut, You could just add Vernon, Connecticut to your contact section. And basically, you don't have to add a street address. That is not so common anymore. The next section of your CV might be a qualifications section, and this is especially true if you're applying to jobs within industry. This section is a way to provide a really strong overview of what you can bring to the position. And it's most often written with these bullet point statements. It includes information about maybe your years of experience, specific skills and knowledge that you have. It's also a really good way to get some of those keywords into your CV. And you can see in this example, the applicant shared their years of experience, right? 6 years of experience. They shared some specific expertise. In this case, it was in engaging with external stakeholders. And they talked about some skills that they have proficiency in. So they're proficient in monitoring and analyzing policy research. And then they identified some programming knowledge. What's nice about a qualification section is some of these bullet point statements might be the same for every position that you're applying to, but then you might change in and out a couple of bullet point statements specific to the position or opportunity. The idea is to really be strategic and pay close attention to the job posting. So we'll move on to education section. In this section, you can include all your college education. Sometimes people also include certifications that are required or essential to the future work that they'll be doing. Sometimes people keep those certifications in a skills section. Basically, with the organization of this section, you can see in this example that the individual began with their degree first, so PhD. In this case, the individual is a PhD candidate. Then they followed with a Master of Arts and then a Bachelor of Science. And you'll see that they kept consistency by using the abbreviations for the degree program from which they graduated or that they're pursuing. Typically, you have your education listed from most recent to least recent, and you'll want to be consistent in that format. You could start with the name of the university or college first. That's definitely another option. There again, I would say think about what you want read first, the degree or the name of the university. If there's a degree that you haven't completed, like in this case, the PhD candidate, it's very appropriate to identify when you expect to receive that degree. And we know with PhDs that you might expect it in May, but then your work might continue and you end up actually maybe graduating in December, and that's okay. What you can do is think about at this moment in time, when do you expect to have that degree? You can add the title of your dissertation and or a thesis, especially if you feel it's related to your future work. And if you're using your CV for academic jobs, you would definitely include the title of your dissertation. You would most definitely include a name of an advisor or advisors. And if you're pursuing a doctorate, you can see on this example that there is no GPA listed for any of the educational degrees. And that's common. Once you're pursuing the PhD, it isn't necessary to have the GPAs. Sometimes people will put a couple of their fellowships or academic awards in this section, but if you have a lot of academic awards and fellowships, you'd probably want to create your own section with a heading called fellowships and awards, or even just awards. In this next example, you can see that the individual started with the name of the university, followed by 2 degrees that they received at that same university. This is an effective way when you have more than 1 degree from the same university to limit having to write the university's name multiple times and the address, the city and state of the university. You'll see in this example that GPAs are listed, and they're always listed out of the whole. So if this individual put a 3.6, they would put a 4.0 in their notation of their GPA. In this case, they put a 3.67, so you'll see that the notation is out of a 4.00. Okay, now we're going to move on to research experience. And there are a number of tips to keep in mind here. I'm just going to show you a research experience example. In this example, the individual began with the name of the university. You could also begin with your research title, followed by the university. Here again, I'm going to share that you want to think strategically about what you want read first. So in this case, the individual identifies the department in which the research is occurring or occurred. And then it's helpful for the reader of the CV to see a short statement about your research focus. This could be, a 1-sentence description would be best here. And then you have some choices. If you'd like to identify your advisor or a PI, a principal investigator, or a lead faculty member in the research that you're doing, you could certainly do that. In using your CV for an academic job, it would be common to list the advisor or PI, but for industry, it would be less common. The exception here would be if the person or persons that you would be listing would be well known in that industry or particular fields, then you strategically would want to mention them, right? But if they would not be known, then it would be fine to leave them off. I'm just going to come back here again. It is recommended that you don't rely on your list of publications, or you don't rely only on your list of publications to show your research, but that you include select bullet point statements. So you'll see bullet point statements in this research experience example here. And basically, you want to use those bullet point statements to feature what you did in your research role. So in creating the bullet point statements, you want to share what you did and or what you accomplish that's relevant to the position for which you're using your CV. And you'll see that each bullet point statement begins with an action verb, performed, trained, recorded, that tells the reader of the CV what the applicant did. And we'll talk more about these bullet point statements in a little bit. The idea here too is that if you were applying for a position, you would be using action verbs to start your bullet point statement that would be reflected in the position that you're applying to. Let's go on to teaching. There are lots of different options in organizing your teaching experience. It's definitely another common section on the CV. And really, you want to think about what you want to feature in this section. Again, are there skills and accomplishments that you might identify using the bullet point statement format? So I'm going to fill this in here. And in this example, the individual identified the courses by name and the semester taught. So we see they lead with University of Connecticut, the department in which they taught, and then they've identified the starting month and year, and they're saying that the position is going through present, meaning it's continuing now. And this individual happens to be an instructor of record, and they're sharing that they taught Introduction to Political Theory in the fall of 2018, and they taught American political parties in the spring of, let's say, now, right? Because it's through present. Um, and then they're using bullet point statements to identify their various skills and tasks. If you're applying to a teaching position, you would want to include the bullet point statements and consider really what you want to feature in the section. Perhaps you want to feature the number of students or the kind of course that you taught. And more broadly, I'm going to give you another example here. This is an example where the individual is focusing more on the courses. Again, starting with the University of Connecticut. And here there's an instructor position and then below a teaching assistant position. And these are both within the University of Connecticut. And they're identifying the courses. Now, they might just identify the courses and end with that. They might think, oh, in the title of the course, the reader can figure out what content I taught. But maybe they really want to convey some broader skills. Maybe they also want to convey that they have strong communication skills, classroom management, or curriculum planning skills, and so forth. So here again, they could add bullet point statements. Now we'll go on to work experience. Here you will want to use bullet point statements to identify the skills and tasks that you did and to also provide a context for those. And so in this example, the applicant begins with their job title, and then they follow by the name of the organization, location, and dates. And note that the bullet point statements are in the past tense, and that's because the job occurred in the past. So if you're writing about something that's occurring now, you would keep your action verbs typically in present tense. And then if it's an experience that happened in the past, you could put them in past tense. There is some information out there that suggests you should match the tense that's in the job posting. And I would encourage you, as you go into the links that I provided in the earlier slide about applicant tracking systems, to determine sort of what approach would be best for you. When writing strong bullet point statements, you'll want to try and include really 3 components. The first component is choosing an action verb to identify what you did. The second component is including some content about how you did what you did. And then the final component is sharing a result, a purpose, or an outcome. And when you can quantify results or outcomes, that's great too. So this is just an activity to really guide you as you look at maybe your current CV and think about how to craft each of your bullet point statements. Let's look at an example. And this example is really going to show the differences between a very basic bullet point statement and one that's quite good. So let's look at this first one. The first bullet point statement here says that the individual drafted and edited written materials. Now this is pretty basic and it's quite generic in that hundreds, thousands of individuals could write that they drafted and edited written materials. So this is not a strong bullet point statement. Let's look at an improved version. In this next version, it says the individual drafted and edited written materials. And now it's telling us how and why to outline the land use department's objectives. So you can see that in this second version, there's more context and it's a little bit better. And then in the final bullet point statement here, it says the individual drafted and edited written materials to outline the land use department's objectives and policies for the town and prepared 3, there's the quantifying part, reports for dialogue with the county commissioner and other stakeholders. So you can see the progression here from a very basic, generic bullet point statement to one that provides really what the person did, how they did it, has the quantifying information there about three reports, and the overall purpose was for this dialogue with the county commissioner and other stakeholders. Now, every single bullet point statement doesn't have to be like this best version. Um, you want to, again, think about which responsibilities or tasks that you've done within your teaching, within your research, within work experience, and so forth. And for those that you want to make the most meaningful, you would want to adopt this approach. All right, another section that's common to most CVs is a skills section. And in a skills section, you want to create categories in which your skills can fit. A lot of times when I'm reviewing CVs, I'll just see a really, really long list that the individual put together, and it's really just kind of like what they were thinking about at the moment, and they might have software skills mixed in with language skills, and it's best for the human being that's going to read your document to see the skills arranged in categories. And this is just a very brief example. In this example, you can see the categories, software, programming, and languages. Having those categories in bold helps the human reader look at this section and immediately see that, oh, this person has some of these skills, and then they can read on to determine which ones. You will also notice in here that there are words like fluent or proficient, and it's great to use those words to qualify your level of competency. Some people might say, if you don't really know it, don't put it on your CV. However, there are times where showing that you're familiar with something can be useful in that it's a signal to the potential employer that you could easily be trained if you have some level of familiarity. So I usually recommend that you use statements to just accurately reflect your level of competency, knowledge, and training. You could also have a lot of different categories here. You could have lab skills, lab equipment. Really, it's up to you to think about what some of those categories would be. All right, publications and presentations are very central to a CV as they feature your research. And in the CV, you'll want to use the citation format that is common to your academic field. You can also create categories within your different sections here. So for example, in a publication section, maybe you have peer-reviewed articles and you have those listed, and then you have another section within publications that says something like maybe invited book chapters. Think about how to make the information easy and accessible for the human reader. And then similarly for presentations, you might have a section called poster presentations or another section called invited talks. And it's just nice, especially if you have a lot of publications or a lot of presentations, it can be helpful to the human reader to have them organized in chunks, if that makes sense for you and the kind of presentations and publications that you have. There are so many content sections or potential possible content sections for a CV. We can't cover them all in this webinar, but there are a few more that I do want to mention. It's pretty common on a CV, especially for CVs that are being written for academic positions, to have a research interest and a teaching interest category. And basically, if you use either of these or both of these, you can display your interests in a list that follows the heading research interests or teaching interests. Another section that I mentioned early on when we were talking about education is you might have an awards and fellowship section. In this section, you might name who is giving, who gave the award, the name of the award, uh, and the dates, if it's a date-bound award, and sometimes you'll even say why it was awarded. It was awarded to the top 2% of the class, or it was awarded for the best poster at the so-and-so conference. And you can follow a similar approach with grants in terms of identifying the granting agency, the name of the grant, the dates, and the award amount of the grant can be really useful to put here as well. Professional memberships is another section. And with this, you would just put the name of the organization. And then a lot of times people will note the duration of the membership. So let's say I've been a member of the American Chemical Society, and then I would put that would be from 2016 to present. Some other sections are leadership, mentoring, and service, and these are often written in a very similar way to your work experience section. It's pretty common to use a bullet point statement or two for leadership. This could be campus leadership, it could be external leadership, it could be leadership in a professional society that you're involved in. Mentoring, that too is often written with bullet point statements, but it's also possible to list the names of the students that you're mentoring and what you're mentoring them for or toward. And then service is often written like an experience section, like a work experience section. And by the term service, it really means your service to the institution or department. So maybe you've served on a faculty hiring committee, or maybe you've been part of a departmental team that's talking about changes to the curriculum. And there are really a multitude of sections that can be added, and you'll want to determine which sections make the most sense in order to portray yourself as a really strong applicant or job candidate. A final page on your CV or within your CV can be a reference page. And sometimes I see it like, let's say your last page ends halfway down the page. Sometimes people will tuck their reference section in on that last page of their CV. Sometimes individuals will dedicate a separate page to their references. And basically, you'll want to be prepared to list 3 to 5 references. And typically you put the name of the reference, their title, their department, or their organization or company, a mailing address, and then identify a preferred contact number, preferred email address, and it's also getting pretty common to identify how the individual knows you. Are they your advisor? Were they a supervisor in a work setting? And if an employer or let's say you're applying to a fellowship and the fellowship committee say they'd like 3 references, then just make sure that you provide exactly what they want. If they want 3 references, you provide 3 references. It's really about following directions here. So even if you had 5 references, if they ask for 3, you'd only identify 3. All right, so as we're nearing the end here, as you create or revise your CV, you'll want to keep in mind what I call the 3 C's: consistency, content, and clarity. And there are some final points here. As you're writing or revising your CV, you'll want to be thinking about the sections you choose to include. You can have a master document and be prepared to include everything and anything. But then at the same time, for some positions, you might say, gee, you know, I don't need a qualifications section for this version that I'm sending to this opportunity. But you'll want to have a qualification section prepared so it's ready to go when you do need it. Within the sections of the CV, so all of the content areas, education, research, teaching, and so on, you will want to organize it by most recent to least recent. Think about the titles of the headings of your sections. The applicant tracking systems like really simple headings. So let's say you had worked within pharmaceutical companies. You could just have a heading there that says work experience. The applicant tracking system would like that heading. If you had a heading that said work within top pharmaceutical companies in the world, the applicant tracking system wouldn't like that heading. It would be a little too complicated. Think about the order in which your sections appear. We know that the first and second pages get read longer by human beings, and then they tend to skim through some of the other content. So if you're applying, let's say, for a teaching position, you might want to get that teaching experience closer to the first page, top of the second page of your CV. If you're applying for a position where you know some of the skills that you have are really what are going to attract the employer, then you might want to make sure you have your skills section appearing on the first page of your CV. So these are the kinds of strategic ways of thinking that you want to keep in mind. Also, the order of bullet point statements within each experience can be really important in that we know that people spend more time on those first couple of bullet points. And remember to use those action verbs to begin each bullet point statement as well. All right, so this wraps up the content on CVs for academic and industry jobs. Please consider booking an appointment with the Center for Career Development. We can review your CV and also know that we're available to help you as you explore and pursue a range of career options. And as a final note, you will be emailed a recording of the webinar. You'll get that in the next 24 hours. And a brief evaluation is going to pop up at the end of the webinar. And really all the best to you as you continue your career journey.